Yeah. So yeah, long time no see, man.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Literally within like the last several hours, 24 hours to be exact.
At the very least, man. How about that game? Like that was a bat shit game.
Yes, possibly minus the bat, because they were doing. I was just listening to another podcast, as it were, talking about that game, and they were talking about how the team pretty much dominated the whole game and spent most of the time in Anaheim's zone and made Billy Huso work for it, and the kid line was doing really good, and it somehow get 1 point out of it because of a stupid deflection and a stupid shootout and just everything. Ugh. It's probably about as frustrated as I've ever been walking out of that building.
One of the general critiques I heard about the reason why the Pens lost that game is with like less than 20 seconds left to go in the game. They're on the power play, and instead of putting a mindful defenseman like Ryan Shea or Parker Weatherspoon on the ice during that power play, for some reason, the MU's decided to go full bore and put Eric Carlson and Chris Letang on, even though they've never been part of the same power play. But, his mindset was, generally when these two play together, it never turns out well. And also, Chris Letang has probably been one of the worst defensive defensemen of all the Penguins this season. But 20 seconds left to go in the game. We're up by one. So what?
And that is why they lost the game.
And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on all sides of planet Earth. And the way that we measure that distinction is we go to Ukraine and we go all the way to Uganda. And this podcast is called Hey, Listen to This. And it is hosted by not one, not three, but two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I'm the one. I'm the only. I'm the one who is kind of curious to see what the weather is gonna be like tomorrow morning when he heads to work at like 6:30 in the morning. Because while he's okay at driving in the snow, it's never a good time. Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the. I'm curious about that too because I've already gone to work twice in bad weather so far this month alone, and I'm not really looking forward to a third time. Matthew James Durzik. And for those of you who don't know what we do here on Hey, Listen to This, well, we look at each other and say, hey, listen to this. And what we listen to are music albums. Each week we pick an album of our choice and we go over it track by track, note by note, picking out what we like, what we don't like, what we thought could be improved, what we thought were the best tracks, the worst tracks, if those apply, of course. And at the end of every episode, we give a final rating and an album recommendation based off the album we just discussed. So, with that being said, Ryan, last time out, it was my choice, and we kicked off the second century of Hey, Listen to This episodes by discussing a genre we haven't talked about before, and that was blues. And we discussed Hard Again by Muddy Waters from 1977. What'd you think of that album, man?
I thought it was an excellent album for me to dive into the blues through. So, a lot of different kind of flavors of blues that I found throughout that album. Coming right out of the gate, you get a prototypical hard as balls blues song with the first song off that record being Manish Boy. But yeah, overall, huge fan of that record. maybe if I come across it in a record store, I might pick it up depending on the price. Because if it's like in one of those, like, oh, hey, look at this, it's a rare blues album, it's like $100. I'm like, well, I've never spent $100 on a record in my life before. Not beginning today. Anyways, yeah, that's my general thoughts. How about you, Matthew? How was it revisiting that album and dissecting it for the purposes of our show?
It was fun dissecting it because I had never listened to the album in full before that review, full disclosure. I enjoyed the time we had discussing it, and fun fact, you talk about maybe seeking it out in a record store. When I was down in Nashville recently for vacation over the Thanksgiving break, we stopped at a bookstore down in Nashville called McKay's. I don't know if you're familiar with it. If not, I highly recommend. But I was going through the CD section. I saw the Muddy Waters album on CD, and I was like, ooh, and then I looked inside the case, like, wait a minute, I'm not 100% sure this is actually the CD that's supposed to go with this case, so unfortunately, I did not bite the bullet and pay the $5 for it, so I myself will have to be on the lookout for Hard Again, but you don't have to be on the lookout for our episode if you want to take a listen to it. Just go back one whenever you're done with this one, or if you want to pause it right now and go back and listen to it, it's a free country, you can do what you want. Now, this week, Ryan, it is your turn. What are we going to be talking about this week on Hey, Listen to This?
Well, this week on Hey, Listen to This, we are, since we've gone through 100 full-length reviews, as evident as what you said earlier, I figured it would be kind of fun to, break an unwritten rule that you and I have in our show here. And in that rule was, let's cover artists that we've not covered previously. Well, I'm thanks to you choosing on a thinly veiled, selection at the end of last week's episode, you choosing the record that we're talking about here today, we are breaking that rule. And the way that we're going to be breaking that rule is we're going to be diving into the album that was released in 1959 by the one, the only, Mr. Jazzman himself, Miles Davis. And for those of you who are not familiar with his discography and what album specifically was released in 1959, it's the legendary album Kind of Blue. Now, typically with how we structure our show, our episodes here, at this point in the episode, we would be the person who is bringing the album to the table for the discussion would do oh, well, for those of you who don't know what a Miles Davis is, let me tell you. Well, I figured you already did one hell of a job with our first Miles Davis episode for reference point that was a tribute to Jack Johnson. So for those of you who want a brief overview of who Miles Davis is as a whole, scroll back about almost I don't know, 6 months worth of episodes at this rate, or it was back in February for Black History Month. It was part of our DEI initiative. Go find that episode, listen to the beginning of that, and then pause, come back here, and you'll get the full context there. Instead, what I'm going to do is, for my overview of this episode here, I'm going to be talking about what led Miles to, produce such what many would consider to be the greatest jazz album of all time. So, you got to think about, what was going on pre, 1959, and even 1958 in the world of jazz as a whole. And there was two styles that were fairly dominant at the time, and those are bebop and hard bop. I know that there's probably a very distinct difference between those two styles, but in my head, amusingly enough, I'm just picturing that SpongeBob SquarePants meme of Weenie Hut Jr. and the other biker bars where SpongeBob is trying to get into. So hard bop is that hard biker bar, and then bebop is Weenie Hut Jr. Anyways, so yeah, our around this time, with hard bop and bebop being the dominant styles of jazz, Miles was finding himself to not feeling satisfied with what was going on within those styles. And the reason for this dissatisfaction is there was a lot of rapid chord changes, and sometimes these chord changes would these key changes would happen every measure. So this essentially handcuffed famous improvisers Miles and also Mr. John Coltrane to focus intensely on playing the right notes for each quick moving chord. And Miles is on record saying this is this kind of challenge became a straitjacket, and because it prioritized showing off technical skill over melodic composition and emotional expression. So from there, with this dissatisfaction in mind, Miles decided to be proactive instead of just sitting in his apartment or wherever he lived at the time and just bitching about the way of the world. And he sought to bring something new to the table. So he had this vision of a more simple, more open-minded musical structure that would give soloists more freedom to create melodies, essentially the antithesis of hard bop and bebop. Maybe it's super Weenie Head Juniors, if we're going to include that SpongeBob SquarePants reference there. So around this time, with this in mind, he was being influenced by the works of composers George Russell and the playing of his piano player, his pianist Bill Evans. So the idea as a whole, for those of you who aren't that savvy with music theory, the idea was essentially instead of chord progressions, they would use what they would call modes, aka scales. So the backing band, the harmony would remain static using a single mode or scale, single mode / scale for many measures, sometimes 8 or 16 bars, as opposed to changing every bar. This would give the soloists a vast open landscape to explore melodies and rhythms without the clock of the rapidly moving changes. So the way that he tested this idea out is within his album that was that was right before Kinda Blue, and that album, for those of you who aren't aware, is Milestones. So the title track off of that album specifically had two distinct modes that were used in its structure, and essentially that track right there found within that album was served as a critical bridge between Miles's hard bop sound and the fully modal concept of Kinda Blue. So going into the studio for Kinda Blue, he had a very explicit plan to record an entire album only using this modal structure. And he gave the studio musicians his quartet at the time, his band that he had, only minimal sketches and no formal rehearsal. So everything we're going to be talking about here today was completely almost off the cuff. It was essentially what Miles was going for, which is a freedom of expression, just what was going in their souls at the time. So with this kind of setup in mind, it basically forced the group to react and create music organically fresh, and it really kind of created a relaxed, timeless, and profound album that would become the classic, the standard for jazz albums to come, Kinda Blue. So, yeah, that is a decent overview of what led Miles to create Kinda Blue. Now, before I give my backstory on the album specifically that we're talking about here today, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matthew. What is your experience with the album that we're talking about today?
So my experience with Kinda Blue, as has been the case with a lot of albums that we've been talking about recently, I first became aware of through the medium of Rolling Stone magazine, or specifically their book about the 500 greatest albums of all time. Because in that book, you get a lot of R&B, you get a lot of rock, you get a lot of pop. You didn't get a whole lot of jazz, but I noticed this one was right up at the very top. I was like, okay, so there's a jazz album scattered among all these great rock records, you know? So I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then one day, as I was going through my dad's record collection, I noticed that he had this album, and so I gave it a spin, and I was like, oh, okay. And I enjoyed it quite a bit, to the point where I either used money I got for Christmas or got it as a Christmas gift within about a year or so of first listening to the album. And it's always kind of been one of the albums I've had on the back burner for a while. It's always one of those ones where it's just like, you know, I'm going to listen to some jazz. Let's go with Kind of Blue. And that may seem very cliche, but as we'll get into, there's a reason for that. But if I'm going to be completely honest, I never really listened to the album analytically or like in depth until this review. Like, I've always kind of listened to it and enjoyed it, but I've never like really took the time to analyze it. So I'm kind of glad we get the chance to talk about that a little bit today.
Me too, man. Me too. And for me, my relationship with Kind of Blue, it's kind of interesting in that it was one of the first records I got in my record collection. For those of you who are like, oh, but was it the first? It wasn't the first. The first record I ever got was London Calling by The Clash, which one day we'll talk about that album. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but one day. I digress. So the reason, the way I got that album into my record collection, it was basically a gift from my now wife, Jamie. So shout out to Jamie. She's pretty cool. She's definitely one of the real ones out there. So the reason why they picked up that album specifically, the person that was helping them at the store that they were shopping at, them being like my wife and my mother-in-law, the person who was helping them out described this album as basically the Avengers of jazz albums, where like you get so like every like, you know, player within the album was like, you know, very foundational, is very legendary in their own right, and that basically tracks because you get like, you know, Miles Davis, obviously, you get Cannonball Adderley, fantastic saxophonist, and then you get the legendary John Coltrane. Paul Chambers is no slouch himself. Bill Evans is one magnificent pianist, and last but not least, you get Jimmy Cobb. And like when we get to like, you know, the one like, you know, specific song within the album itself, we'll talk about how there was one additional pianist within this album that we're talking about, but no disrespect to Wynton Kelly there. But so yeah, got that as my first like, you know, jazz album within my record collection. One of my first records that I ever got, and then later on in my college career, I actually wrote a paper on the album that we're talking about here today. Now, for those of you who are like, oh God, is this going to be a 3-hour episode where Ryan's going to do like a dissection of like, you know, all the different meanings within the tracks here? Not necessarily, because not to sound like an old man, but it's been a while since I wrote that paper. So like, you know, once I turned it in, as you do, it goes out the window. So, but I have fond memories of writing that paper because I did it traditionally old school. And when you're talking about old school, I'm not talking about like, you know, going on Wikipedia and like, you know, looking up facts or anything like that. Or yeah, that would be, I guess that would be old school now, because like new school is just like, hey, AI, let me put in a prompt and you give me all the information. No, like when I'm talking about old school, like me and Jamie went to a library and I took books off of the shelf and I read them, and use that as reference points for my paper. So yeah, it was a very positive experience for me. So yeah, that's basically my experience for Kind of Blue. It's I'm not going to go so much into my thoughts about the album itself because that's the intended purpose of the review here. But yeah, one could say I'm fairly familiar with the album.
I'm relatively familiar with the album as well, and it's funny you bring that up because it just made me realize, you do talk about kids nowadays, kids these days, using ChatGPT or AI to help them find information. There was a time back whenever we were in college, because me and Ryan did go to college together at Geneva, that I don't know if you had this or if your professors did this, but I'm sure a few of mine did, where using Wikipedia was highly discouraged, if not forbidden. Like, you couldn't use that at all because it was such a... in those days, it was such a given that, not everything on Wikipedia is true, and Wikipedia is very hackable and manipulative, and to a degree, that's probably still true, but nobody seems to want to edit Wikipedia anymore, except when they have to. All that to say, I give you full props for highlighting how papers were used to be created, and hopefully, in some time in the future, will be created again, because I'm not going to get into the whole AI debate, but let's just say kids should learn to read books. That being said, before they learn to read books and work on their papers, we should talk about the album for them, because hopefully they're listening. So I will switch it over to you for the first track off of Kind of Blue, the first of 5, and that is So What?
So with the opening track here, there's so much going on, and I'm just gonna go beat by beat in terms of my thoughts and different points I want to highlight, and I'll go over all the syllables and my thoughts about it as well. So coming right out of the gate, love the intro from Bill Evans and Paul Chambers. You get Bill just laying down nice chords, and then Paul just establishing the groove and gets the listener really in the mood for what's about to occur within the track. After that moment, the interplay between the horns and the bass trading off licks is it's almost hypnotic, dude. It's just so tight. And for those of you who are fans of the show, you know that I'm always a fan of call and response, but this is not call and response dynamics at play here. It's almost just they're one in the same in terms of it's one complete package delivering a nice motif that's the establishment for the song. And I just love the interplay. It's just so fucking tight. I can't get over that interplay whatsoever, at all. So the first solo here goes to Mr. Davis himself, and just that first drop off that you get from Miles in that solo is just, in my head, it's one of the most iconic moments in jazz history. I know that might be maybe a little sacrilege. I know So What is a really popular jazz song, so maybe it's not sacrilege. Maybe it is village. Anyways, the way that he pops out and then he just goes down real quick, it's so minimal, and just the way that he constructs his solos, as a complete package, he uses the effect of silence and space to really just add to the melodic composition of what he's trying to deliver within the performance. So yeah, it's just so good. It grabs your attention because you got to think around this time what's happening. We talked about hard bop and bebop, where you get all these rapid changes and people just trying to run the changes and trying to show off skill. But here is Miles completely flipping the script and saying, "Hey, no, we're going to focus on melody and emotion," and it just works so well. One note that I did have about his solo though, and this probably goes with the challenges that the group faced within the recording process here. In that there wasn't a lot of prep. It was more mainly just like spontaneous stuff, like a lot of improvisation here. Bill Evans underneath Miles' solo is just trying his best to follow Davis in terms of like, okay, hey, where is the downbeat? Where do I place the chords? Because he kind of just, it's like kind of all spacey. It's kind of out there, which it's effective if you're not paying attention. But if you zoom in, you're like, oh, I get it, Bill. You're struggling. I get it. I would struggle too, but I'm not a piano player, so I would definitely struggle. So the next solo here goes to Mr. Coltrane, and I love how Miles and John work harmoniously together. Like they're basically a much a yin and a yang within the jazz genre in itself. In that, like I said, Miles is more focused on like using silence and using more of like a focus of a developing melody and emotion. And not to say that Coltrane wasn't developing emotion, but he was definitely like more on the technical side, and not to take away from like the anything that he has. Like I love each soloist and each jazz legend in their own right, but the way that Coltrane develops his solos, it's more about like it does show off technical skill, but he does do enough to like establish like melody and expression within his solos. And one note that I do want to highlight within his solo, though, there was a spot where it seems like he's trying to rev up, but he can't quite reach the heights that he wants. It's almost just like that metaphor of that Greek myth where I don't know what the exact name of the myth is, but the guy who's like pushing the rock up the hill and then he goes back down, he goes back up, like that's what I was very much picturing within that solo. Next solo goes to Cannonball himself. For me, I found Cannonball's work here as a nice middle ground between Miles and Coltrane. Like you get like somebody who isn't really just playing a bajillion notes a minute, but also you get somebody who isn't like sparse within his work. And like one section that I did find noteworthy here in his solo is it seems like a section where he's dancing but doing like a little like side shuffle with his horn, and I love that. I love the playful nature of it. It's just really really good. And also just it like there's a section within that solo that Cannonball's doing that it seems like he's doing like a falling like stepping like just going down the stairs. Like I noted that. I very much appreciated that. The next solo here and the final solo within the track goes to Mr. Bill Evans himself. Solid solo, and I do appreciate what the band's doing to provide the harmonic context within Evans and solo, because they're just doing that basic lick that you found at the beginning of the track. Very nice, very good. One other thing I do want to highlight about the track is Jimmy Cobb. I know he doesn't really get a solo or chance to shine, but he's doing his absolute best, and he's absolutely doing it within perfection, keeping everything tight and focused. So yeah, not much else to say about the track as a whole. I did have a note here about this is one of the most famous examples of modal jazz, but yeah, I already talked about modal jazz at the overview of this album. Only other thing I got to say about So What is it did land in my top 3 favorite tracks on the album. And for full disclosure, before I reveal where it landed in a placement standpoint, I only have a top 3. I don't have a bottom anything. And it would be fun. We only have 5 tracks, so jokes aside. And specifically with So What here, after much thought, I didn't want to overthink it, but yeah. So What is my favorite track off the whole record.
So my thoughts on So What, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you that the intro from Paul Chambers and Bill Evans, there is I would almost say an elegance to it, because it just feels that both of them, it's weird. It feels elegant, and yet it almost feels like they're warming up. Like, they didn't even start to, like, play the song. It's just, Davis probably hit the record button and said, all right, guys, whenever you're ready, you know what song to play. And then they caught the tail end of that and just like, actually, this kind of works too. We'll just add that on. I don't think that's what happened at all. I'm sure that intro was very much written out as an intro by Davis to be like, sort of give that sort of live feel of here we are warming up to play this very exquisite jazz song. And then they go into the exquisite part, which is the rest of the song. The bass riff by Chambers in the opening is iconic, and you're right about the call response being what it is, because it almost feels like it's response call. Like, the main point of that riff is the horn pop with Miles and band, but the bass is doing the majority of the work. It's a very weird dynamic, and it works so well. As far as Davis's solo, the one word I kept coming back to, not just throughout this song, but throughout the majority of the album, is lyrical. It feels like Miles is trying to sing words with his trumpet. And granted, the modal jazz that he chooses for here, which is far away from the heavy structure of a lot of prior jazz. I remember back when I was in high school, I went to a jazz festival at Lincoln Park, and one of the teachers, a piano player by the name of Ralph Lalama, was talking about how, a lot of old jazz and early jazz had a very basic 16-bar structure where, it followed a certain pattern of chords, and then you just sort of make a riff on top of that. This is not that at all. This is, hey, we have two chords, and as long as you're somewhat close, do whatever the hell you want. And that's exactly what happens on this track. And Miles very much is going for a sense of showcasing a free spirit through his trumpet playing on that solo. And I find it interesting that you thought that Bill Evans was struggling to keep up with Miles. I think it's backwards. I think Miles is letting Davis set the pace, and he is just coming in whenever he wants. Because like you said, he was getting tired of being trapped in the straitjacket of traditional jazz structure. So instead of trying to play as many notes as he can and going with the technical side, he's literally saying, I'm going to play what I feel, and if that means not playing anything for a few seconds, so be it. And I think that is leading to Evans dictating when the chords are and Miles just going off of that. So I think even though Davis is structuring the piece, he's letting Bill Evans drive the car in this case. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong about that. But I feel like that is the mode for the majority of the song. Then you get to Coltrane, and I appreciate the fact that you hinted that he was struggling probably more than anybody else to get out of the technical, for lack of a better term, through the fire and flames mode, and just going buck wild on this. He is trying so hard to play to the melody and play freely. And to be fair, he does do a great solo and does manage to be as free as he can be, but there's still those moments where you feel like he is trying to be fast, be very fast when it comes to playing the saxophone. But it still does hit the melody close to the thing. And that's the other thing that's great about this piece, is that because it's so very bare bones in structure and so open to interpretation, the possibility of playing anything other than something amazing is, pretty rough. I mean, the only way you can really screw this song up is to not try. And it's clear that players as professional and as skilled as Miles Davis, as John Coltrane, as Cannonball Adderley, and Bill Evans are professional enough and technical enough that they can easily work with something like this, and yet it creates something that is so brand new. Talking about Cannonball Adderley, his solo, I agree, very much is closer to Davis than Coltrane, although it does sort of stick in the middle where it has that technical prowess, but it has that smooth, open, very stylistic feel, and it's great. Bill Evans, I think, is just showing off already during his solo, and it's nice how, like you said, the way the band inverts things, because for the majority of the solos, Bill and Paul Chambers are the ones who are sort of anchoring the chords, but obviously if Evans is soloing, he can't do that. So, in a sense, with Miles playing the soft motif, the da-na, he is the one now controlling things while Evans is free to just play as many chords and beautiful notes as he possibly can. And I know you said Jimmy Cobb does a great job of locking things down. I agree. I think Paul Chambers is the unsung hero of this song because not only is he locking things down on a tempo level, he is locking things down on a melodic level because it's him and Bill Evans and that's it. So if Bill Evans is going off into magical look what I can do land, someone's got to make sure the chords are in the right place, and Chambers does an amazing job of doing that. So the only other thing I have to say about the song before I give it my ranking, because it did land in my top 3, spoiler alert, is that the way that this song kind of fades out, like it starts with the band playing the call and response part one more time, and then just very casually fades out with just bass and piano and drum, and it almost makes you feel like, they're not stopping, but they're just fading away into the back. Like they're almost like expecting you to applaud, which is very deserved because this song gets all the applause from me. I, much like you, have a top 3 and a bottom nothing, and much like you, this song, So What, is right at the top at number 1.
Sometimes it pays not to overthink stuff, man, and it would have been absolutely hilarious if you were like, yep, this song deserves all of my applause, but I'm going to put it at number 2. So that would have been funny, but yeah. It's one of the interesting things that you mentioned in your dissection about So What, and like I will definitely piggyback off of that, and we'll very much talk about it throughout the rest of the album here, is the fact that you said like when Miles is soloing, it seems like he's almost trying to like sing through the trumpet, and like that's very evident throughout like several examples within this album here. But yeah, I just clocked that, and that was a very good note on your part. So yeah, I'm glad that we're basically in agreement that one of the most iconic jazz songs of all time, off of one of the most iconic albums of all time, is the best song off the whole record. So, without any further ado, are you ready to keep the train all rolling and discuss the next track here, which is Freddie Freeloader?
I am very much ready to discuss Freddie Freeloader. And funny enough, the closer to side A, if we were going by vinyl terminology, but it is track 2 of 5. And that opening, for the longest time, that opening is pretty much the only part of the song I could ever remember. Because it signified that So What was done, and I was just kind of like, okay, all right. But just hearing that opening line, it feels like pure late night jazz. Like you can hear that riff and imagine yourself, sitting in a smoky cafe in a metropolitan downtown area, full tux, dressed to the nines, glass of scotch or cigar in hand. Not that I drink scotch or smoke cigars, but I'm just painting a picture, folks. And you're just sort of in that element of pure uptown elegance. And it's like 2 o'clock in the morning regardless. That's kind of what I hear whenever I hear the opening notes to Freddie Freeloader. And again, that is where the majority of my thoughts were up until this review. Then we get into the solos, which first of all, you mentioned that Wynton Kelly is playing on a different track, and it's this one. Not only did I forget that he was the one on this track, I didn't realize how good his solo was. Like, holy mess. First of all, for him to go first instead of Miles Davis is pretty bold in of itself, but there is a certain jovial nature to that piano solo that is just astounding. Like, you think, okay, well, it's just piano and it's whatever, it's fine. And then all of a sudden, you just realize he is having his. It sounds fun. Like, it just sounds like he is, like, almost doing, like, almost a honky tonk type of bounce on the piano during that solo. And that's not an easy thing to portray in a song this structurally brooding, because the chords that Miles has chosen again are very late night, but in a sense, Wynton Kelly's just like, oh well, da 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 dee dee da da do, and just is very much having fun with that solo. So I thought that was a big highlight off of this track for me, especially when you're comparing him to the likes of a legend like Bill Evans. Then you get to Miles, who once again is trying to be lyrical with his playing. He's feeling like he's trying to say something, or at the very least, try to convey his thoughts into trumpet notes. And I spoke on So What about how the modal structure allows for a very open canvas for the players to go with. Here, I think that stretches even deeper, because the way that you get those notes sometimes in Miles' solo, it's not just Miles, but Miles I think was the most notable, where it feels like he would be playing something that was off, but not all the way off. Like, he'd play a note that very much felt like it was bluesy. And for those who have never been in band structure in high school, or heaven forbid a jazz band structure, and never learned about, like, blue chords or blue notes, like, if you want to hear something in that vein, this is a great place to start with Freddie Freeloader, because there are notes in here where you're going to think to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't belong there. That sounds like he missed something, but it doesn't. He's going for a bluesy feel. He's going for very out there type of sound, and he succeeds very well. Same with John Coltrane. I thought his solo was once again kind of caught in the I want to slow down and play what I feel, but I'm not sure how to do that. But despite that, he comes up with a sound that's very unique on his own, and once again hits some of those notes that, again, feel very intentionally bluesy, because maybe that's just what he felt, or maybe that's not quite what he had in mind, but it just sounded good. And Miles being Miles, that, hey, he is going to some way, somehow say, if that take sucked, we're not using it. He's no slouch when it comes to picking out the right sounding things. And again, it works well because of the composition, which again is very bare bones, and definitely seems a little, I would say, even less structured than So What. Not to the point where it's unstructured, but it's less structured. Like, it feels more open, and it feels like maybe that's because the bass of Paul Chambers isn't being asked to do quite as much, except for lay down some basic chords and some basic walking notes. And Jimmy Cobb, once again, keeps things tight on a pulse level. He is doing a very good job. By the way, I didn't mention this during So What, but it's an interesting part I picked up on a couple of songs throughout this first half, is that every once in a while, you'll catch Jimmy Cobb just randomly playing, like, some click notes and, doing the sort of, like, 3 times in a row. And that's just, him just being back there trying to be like, okay, I'm a little bored. Let's throw this in there. Okay, back to tempo. And I thought that was kind of cool. And then you get Cannonball Adderley, where, again, sort of finds himself in the middle of Coltrane's speed and Miles's very, very patient delivery. Adderley is just it's almost like a violinist, where he is just trying to, keep to the melody or modal structure as much as possible, and yet it has such a very easy flowing, very almost a waterfall type of feel to it where it just feels effortless and it just sounds great. And then you get a bass solo, I think, from Paul Chambers, because I'm not sure if he is trying to do a solo or is just realizing that he needs to comp a few notes in order to make his presence felt. But yeah, the playing and the structure of Davis and Coltrane, particularly on this song, really stuck home with me. And I do like how in the outro, the way that Davis leads back in with the riff is not on the same beat as the opening. I did thought that was kind of cool before things fade out. So yeah, I on repeated listens and repeated analysis, I find myself coming away from Freddie Freeloader a lot more optimistic and appreciative of it than I had been before in my life. And I've been listening to this album on and off for close to 20 years now. All of which to say that it also landed in my top 3, and it landed at number 3.
Number 3 with a bullet, man. Is that an expression? I don't think that should be an expression because it's typically number 1 with a bullet. Number 3 is just like, hey, you kind of tried, and I'm gonna give you a note, but yeah, I digress.
If it's number 1 with a bullet, I think it might be number 3 with a steel chair.
Oh man! Shout out to steel chairs out there. You guys are the real ones out there. Anyways, so so with my thoughts and feelings about Freddie Freeloader, so I'm going to discuss like why Kelly was the pianist here as opposed to Bill Evans. So you kind of alluded to the fact that this song here specifically is almost like, it kind of reminds you of like a blues kind of structure. Well, turns out it is actually in a 12-bar blues form. So kudos to you for picking that up. Kind of like, on like your ear listening style there. So great job on your part. And the reason why Wynton Kelly was on the track as opposed to Bill is that he was just considered more of a specialist in the blues style, and so that's basically it. And I don't want to say thank goodness he's on this track, but for him kicking everything off, like you mentioned, like that solo that he does at the beginning is like very whimsical and it's almost like very playful. I'm right there with you. Like it's a great way to not kick off the track, because the way you kick off the track is with like the intro, which that in its own right is very solid, as you described. Like you get that solid back and forth line between the horns doing that line and Kelly coming in with the response. It's almost like very similar to like So What, where you get like two elements just working cohesively together. It's just so beautiful. But when I'm talking about like Wynton kicking everything off and style, I'm talking about like solos in its own sense. But yeah, Kelly here in his solo, like you described, he's very much exploring the melody of the song, but also kind of just showing off skill a little bit, but not like so much technical skill that he's running the changes, because there's not much changes here to run. But yeah, I do like how that kicks everything off. And then Miles' solo, you talk about like, how he very much is very lyrical within his improvisations. And yeah, right here, there was a spot that I clocked that it just seems like he goes high up, he pauses before coming in, and it's almost just like he's responding to his own line. And that was just such a clever thing that he did, and I love that as a listener. And shout out to Wynton Kelly as well. I know it's a different song, and it seemed like we kind of disagreed with Evans's performance in So What, in terms of him trying to like his part in doing Miles's solo, like on the harmony front. But Kelly here is doing a much better job finding the downbeat within Miles's solo. So shout out to him. Excellent guy. I might actually check out his stuff going further. I'm kind of curious about what he has to offer as like an artist. Coltrane solo is very solid as well. Very much a Coltrane solo through and through. And I also I like how the solos here were arranged because you get the dip into the water with Wynton Kelly, essentially just exploring the melody, and then you get Miles in his lyrical stuff, and then you get Coltrane who turns up the heat even a little bit more. And yeah, the way that he does turn up the heat is very effective. And there was one spot where it seems like he's going higher up on the horn, but also he's taking one step back as quickly as he goes back up. It's very much that was a poor execution of that, but that's how I felt about that specific moment. And Cannonball solo is very solid as well. The section where he goes high up, almost in a dizzying way, is so satisfying. That last section that you highlighted, I didn't really clock that Chambers was trying to do a solo. I actually kind of noted that Kelly was doing another brief solo. If anything, I think I'm just going to conclude that it was just a musical interlude to kind of get the group back into the main finish of the song. So yeah, solid song. However, it did not land in my top 3. It is a good song nonetheless.
Which is totally fair. It wasn't until, honestly, the 3 spot for this album probably could flip-flop between this and another track, depending on my mood and depending on the day. But I listened to it again today, and I was just like, I think I like this track a little bit more than the other one. So that's why it's there. But even then, I think what got me was, again, the bluesiness of it. And not just the fact that it's a 12-bar blues format, but again, it feels like very late night, very darkened room, very blue, not just in music, but also in just the picture it paints with its music. So I thought that was really, really good. And again, I see this as a beacon of teaching anyone who's interested in jazz, what it means to play a little bit off of the beaten path. So yeah, I dug this song quite a bit.
Totally understand. And let me just set the record straight. I don't there any the other track in this album that did not land in my top 3. It doesn't mean it's a subpar track. It's just personal preference at the end of the day for me. But yeah, before we do that though, before we venture on into more of the album, as you alluded at the beginning of this discussion of Freddie Freeloader, you highlighted that it was the end of side A on the vinyl side. So I like to believe that we live by the physical form here, and hey, listen to this. So let's honor that by me asking you a question that I've just been dying to ask ever since Chris Letang did not take the body and indeed tried to strip the puck off of Bennett Seneke, which indeed led to the game-tying goal within 1.1 second left in the game. I had one question that popped right into my brain, and I was like, I have to ask Matthew this, but not right now, later on when we do this episode.
It almost feels like you answered your own question there, but I know how this song and dance goes. So I will, in response, ask you what that question is.
Thank you for playing along with the gag here. If the dear listener out there is enjoying what we are bringing to the table with this episode here specifically, and they want to help us, keep on keeping on, keep us going here week in, week out, producing content on a weekly basis here. What are some ways that they can help support us? And also, what are other ways that they can help connect with the show?
Well, the easiest way to help out us in what we are doing is to keep listening to Hey, Listen to This. And the way you can do that is go on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. The 3. which are Pocket Cast, Spotify, and Apple Music. Then, of course, there is the fourth one, the outside choice, if you will, and that is YouTube. We upload our episodes to those formats and to those platforms every week. So whether you like to use YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or podcast or whatever podcasting platform that you decide, that is where you can find us. And if you are on any of those sites, feel free to let us know how we did. If you liked what you heard, give us a 5-star rating, or if you're on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what your favorite part of the episode was, or perhaps the part where you're just like, oh, I listened to this, and what were you guys talking about? And so if you enjoy what you hear and you feel like you want to share it with someone, but you're not sure who that someone is, fear not, we are on social media as well. We are on Threads, we are on Facebook, we are on Blue Sky, we are on Instagram, and if you are looking for us on those sites, the way you can find us is either type in our name, which is Hey, Listen to This, updated with our new cool blue logo. Ryan, thank you once again for whipping that up for us. Also, if you're looking for the more old school, new school way to find us, that will be our username, and that is ttheylisten. That is ttheylisten. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky, etc. By using that username. And speaking of ttheylisten, if you want to reach out to us directly, but you do not know us directly, we have an email address that you can message us at. That is ttheylisten@gmail.com. Again, that is ttheylisten@gmail.com. If you want to give us some feedback, recommend what you would want us to check out based off of what we're talking about, or if you want to recommend what we're talking about next, because we have done listener requests in the past and we would like to do them again. So again, that is ttheylisten@gmail.com. And as always, to those of you who have done that so far, whether it's email us, listen to our shows, share us on social media, thank you, because again, we're just two dudes who like to talk about music. We're not sponsored by any type of beer or video game or male enhancement product. We're just two guys. Do it. Listen, I was reading some stuff earlier. Don't question me. Just look on my Blue Sky feed and you can figure out what I'm talking about. No, we are not sponsored by anybody. We are very much just a very DIY situation, and we thank you for being part of that with us. And as always, Ryan, thank you once again for not only putting up with my weird non sequiturs, but being a great co-host of this show.
Well, I mean, you put up with my weird non sequiturs as well, so we make a good pair, man. I appreciate the compliment and I take it in stride, and the compliment goes right back to you, man. There's nobody else that I would rather do this kind of show here with. So very honored that you take the time every week, just doing all the work that you do to help, record these episodes, produce them, all the 9 yards. So, and also, shout out to the listener out there. Thank you for listening to us. If you guys take the opportunity to pop onto any of our socials, I did post our Wrapped of the Year, as the kids would call it. And, again, like Matt illustrated, we are just very much a do-it-yourself kind of podcast. It's very raw, very authentic. It's just two dudes on microphones, just record and talk about music. And the fact that anybody takes the time to listen to two white guys just talk about albums week in, week out, thank you. It means a lot to us. And without any further ado, let's get the listener back to the meat of the episode, in that we are going to be traveling on into the rest of the album here, with the next track being Blue, not in blue, not in yellow, but blue in green.
Yes, blue and green. And several years before, Joni Mitchell would use both of those colors in her songwriting abilities. So Ryan, I kick it over to you for this starter of side B.
So, yeah, with blue and green here. At the beginning of the review here, you were talking about like how Miles is very lyrical. He's almost trying to sing through his trumpet here. Like here, this is very much like this, like the central the way that the instrumentalists express themselves throughout the song, and the way that everything begins with Evans and Miles just like doing that very beautiful intro, and how Miles just comes in with that muted horn, and it legitimately feels like to me that he is singing through that horn, and it is just so fucking beautiful. I just love it, time in time out, every day of the year. And after that, Evan takes the lead. I don't want to call it a solo because it's not so much of a solo. It's more of an instrumental focus. For lack of a better descriptor, I'll call it a solo. And that section there is very beautiful. I like what Evans did there. And after that, you get John Coltrane coming in next, and this is a note that I made. It just seems like, yes, he does do what is what the song is asking him to do, in that he's doing very lush lines and he's singing through his horn. But there is moments though where it seems like he's trying to contain himself, like a kid that just drank a Monster Energy drink and is just sitting at the Thanksgiving Day table and is just like, okay, hold on. You get those rapid licks. Like, I love John Coltrane, no disrespect to him, but I did clock that, and I did find that very amusing. And so after that, Miles comes in next with his solo, and that solo there specifically is probably the most melodic he's been on the record here so far. And that's not saying so much because in the previous two tracks, So What, he was pretty sparse, and Freddie Freeloader, he was pretty solid as well. But here, it's very melodic. It's very much what the song is asking him to do. And then after that, you get Evans basically wrapping off the track, with a nice solo. And one thing I did notice though within his solo at the very end, the track as a whole doesn't resolve, and I kind of like that. I kind of like that, little hey, fuck your resolution. That's life, man. So a little bit about this song here specifically, because I do have a little story behind it before I give this album a ranking within my top three. Because spoiler alert, Blue and Green does appear in my top three. Where does it appear? Well, hold on one second. Let me tell you the story, and then I'll let you know the number. So essentially, there was a lot of dispute with Blue and Green and who wrote the actual song. And it was either Bill Evans or Davis who were trying to take credit for it. Bill was stated in an interview that he wrote the piece, but however the story is told that Davis simply gave Evans a couple of chords written on a piece of paper and asked Bill, what would you do with this? And Evans wrote the entire tune in response. When Bill eventually later brought up the composition credit to Davis, Bill basically said that Miles wrote him a check for $25 as a as compensation, effectively buying the rights to the song. So again, maybe $25 back in the day for a song that they didn't know that was going to be as popular as it is today might have gone somewhere. So essentially, from there, on Bill's own 1959 album, Portrait in Jazz, he recorded his own version of the tune and credited it to Davis and Evans. So essentially acknowledging their collaboration. So yeah, and to this day, most music scholars and official listings recognize both men as co-composers. So at the very end, it was very much kumbaya. We made this together, and let's celebrate that. So, for those of you who are waiting with bated breath, being like, "Hey, wait, Ryan, like, where did this land in your top 3? I did not forget." Well, dear listener, let me reward your patience and your appreciation of my side tangent there by saying Blue and Green is my second favorite track off the whole record.
Second favorite. All right. So you dug the merging of the blues and the greens to make the jazz. My thoughts on this song. First of all, I got to give a shout out to Jimmy Cobb because throughout this entire track, he is doing some exquisite work on the brushes. Now, I'm a drummer. I mean, I haven't recently, but I've drummed in the past. And for the one thing I can never really get a true technique on was brushes. Like, I could play with sticks just fine. I could play with timbale sticks just fine. But brushes are a different beast. And it really takes a lot of technique and effort to pull off a great brush track. And Jimmy Cobb definitely does that here. And then you get that opening from Miles Davis, which I am wholeheartedly in agreement with you. It is probably his most lyrical and very tasteful playing up to this point. It's not my favorite playing of his or my most like standoutish, but I did recognize how that opening felt very fanfare-ish, very it almost reminded me of how I was just listening earlier today to the Tony Bennett MTV Unplugged, and no, not out of protest, but I was listening to that album, and there was a moment where he was covering Fly Me to the Moon, and he very much just did so a cappella with just piano behind him, and it kind of reminded me of that, just basically minimal backing and say your piece, declare it to the world, and that's very much what Miles is doing here. Meanwhile, Bill Evans is very much running the engine on this track. Once again, I think he is showing why he is the co-writer of this song because it's very much rooted in his chord structure and his arrangement. Not to say that Davis doesn't apply the basic structure of modalism, but I think this is more a showcase for Evans than it is anything else. I have on my notes that the openness of the arrangement allows everyone here to pretty much do whatever the hell they want. And whenever you were talking about John Coltrane, I think that's what I was referring to. Because it seems like Coltrane is almost trying to do what Miles did, but not quite with the same elegance and grace as Miles had. Like, it's very much... certain tracks like Naima and maybe the opening of A Love Supreme Aside, because John Coltrane, I think, can do ballads, but for some reason, like you said here, there's a very manic, like, energy to it, which did kind of, I wouldn't say turn me off, but it did kind of make me wonder, is this supposed to be happening right now? Like, I'm not sure if, player A is playing game B over here. Like, it feels very twitchy and strange, but it still sounded very good because, again, the openness of the arrangement allows everyone to pretty much do whatever they want. And so, yeah, I did appreciate this track quite a bit for its openness, its lushness. That's the one word I would probably take away from this track is lush. It's a very lush track. That feels very broad stroke, floaty, but all in very good ways. However, it did not land in my top 3.
That's perfectly fine, man. I think with me, I was just specifically taken back by just the lyrical nature of just how like smooth everything absolutely sounded. It's absolutely was a treat for me to just listen and just enjoy. So, but totally respect you not including this in your top 3. I'm curious to see if the other spot in our rankings is going to be shared by the same song, but obviously it would be different placings because that's how it works. So, without any further hesitation, are you ready to boogie on into the penultimate track off of Kinda Blue, with the next track being not Some of the Blues, not No Blues, but All Blues?
Well, funny enough, I'm pretty sure maybe a year or two before this, Miles did have a piece entitled No Blues, so maybe this is a response to that. Maybe he's writing a diss track to himself. I don't know. Let's find out. First of all, discussing this track makes my hands hurt because that opening from Bill Evans, like, I never put two and two together just how frantic that piano part is, and I'm sure there's probably piano players out there saying, "Oh no, that's easy." Well, I'm not a piano player, so I'm just gonna say what I think, and that's my hands hurt thinking about how fast he's playing on this opening. Like, he's just going, and even as he's using two hands, it still feels very frenetic. And for him and Miles to come up with that as the base of the melodic structure is a very wild and daring choice, and I respect it very, very hard. It is just a very wild, very flourishing sound that kicks this track off. And immediately that is countered by the main riff of the song from the saxophones, where they do that very like it's so smooth, and it feels like the closest this album comes to anything big band related, because you have the saxophones playing in tandem, which is very much a big band type of thing. But it just sounds good. And then you have Miles rising above all of that with his muted trumpet, which I believe is the first time throughout the whole album that we've heard the muted trumpet. And it just sounds so smooth. And the way that this opening essentially sticks with, but yet challenges these 12-bar blues format, I thought was very appreciative. Because you get the wild opening, then you get the horns, and then when Davis starts, that's when the blues, in essence, start the blues structure of the 12 bars. So it's more or less a 20-bar blues, if you will. And then when you get to the solos themselves, things sort of strip back to a more basic 12-bar blues format, where Evans isn't hurting his hands as much. Cobb and Chambers are pretty much keeping things anchored down with the way that they are playing. And by the way, Cobb, once again, with some magnificent brushwork, particularly on the opening, that really adds the perfect counter to what Evans is doing. But when you get to the solos, it does establish that this is a 12-bar blues. But at the same time, because everything is so relatively bare bones, because you're not really getting a super structure, you're just getting, again, basic blues chords. Between the solos from Adderley and Davis and Coltrane, you get the sort of free jazz feel that I think Miles was going for. You get more of the modal improvisation that is more structured to the open jazz feel that we're very familiar with today. Speaking of John Coltrane, holy smokes, that solo. Easily his best on the album so far. And I think and I don't know if these tracks were recorded in this order. I'm probably going to say that's not the case. But sequencing wise, here you have Coltrane, I think, blending the synthesis of Davis's modal nature of just, playing what you feel with the traditional run as fast as you can jazz that preceded this. And I think here he has his best synthesis of those two styles, and his solo is both melodic and technically skilled to a level that is without rival. And realistically, the same can be said for both Cannonball Adderley and Bill Evans. I didn't necessarily think their solo stood out as much as Coltrane's, but that's not an insult. That's just me saying Coltrane is a beast on this track. Adderley, once again, very much the smooth sort of almost lighthearted guy. You know, it almost feels like when we talk about the playing, Coltrane is very much rooted in the old structure. Davis is firmly rooting himself in the new structure, and Adderley is just trying to find his way in the structure. And it does provide a little bit of a relief from the tension. Not to say that the tension isn't great, but Adderley does provide more of a standard nature compared to the other two. And Bill Evans is just, Bill Evans, so he is just dominating on the piano as he is wont to do. And then it gets back into the main riff at the end of the track, which is, again, sounds so wonderful. And then you get that last little riff by Miles, that little do-do, that sort of signifies that things are coming to a close. I thought that was a nice little touch. So yeah, this song rules, and we have completed my top 3 on this album, with All Blues coming in at number 2.
All right, man. So you've wrapped up your top 3 before the final track off the album. So kudos to you. And also, there's only 5 tracks off the LP, so not really that much of an accomplishment. Also, take your time. It's your review. It's your top 3, not mine. So, anyways, the way that I'm gonna start my discussion here is by talking about like that riff that you're talking about that Evans does at the beginning, where he's doing that rolling riff, and it like your hand was hurting just thinking about that. So apparently, with that, Miles was trying to capture the rhythmic feeling reminiscent of an African finger piano with this composition. So yeah, that's what that effect was for. So yeah, shout out to Evans. Like that beginning right there with that riff is just so good, and I just love how it's counteracted by the horns. They're so tight, and the way that the horns ride the swells and everything like that, it's just so thick you can cut it with a knife, man. I just love it so much. So dive into the solos here, specifically though. One thing I'm going to make a comment on, and then I'll make comments on the individual solos. You made the comment that Miles is very much rooted in the new structure, Coltrane's in the old structure, and Cannonball is just trying to find his way in life. I would maybe counteract that by flipping Cannonball and Coltrane, and maybe kind of saying Coltrane's in the new structure. He's very much trying to adopt the modal sense of Davis, but in his own different way. And I think Cannonball is very much still your traditional bop kind of saxophonist. So, but I mean that's just my minor opinion. Who's to say which one is correct? It doesn't matter at the end of the day. But anyways, specifically, I guess I'll talk about the Coltrane solo coming right out of the gate, because that was the one that you highlighted as the most impactful off the track. And yeah, dude, everything here is just so silky smooth. There's plenty enough moments where he's showing off skill, but you can tell that he's just jamming out with the melody. He's just having an absolute fun time with it. And one moment I specifically clocked as specifically enjoyable was those bouncing descending licks. He's just having fun with that. That sounded so good to my ears. And then moving over to the solo that comes right before that would be Mr. Davis, and yeah, very much still in that Miles Davis traditional style. He's using silence just as much as the notes. So very much making use of all the elements within his arsenal there. And I did appreciate how he goes up high and he's just blasting notes at some points in that solo. It's so good and tight, very enjoyable in my ears. And then, going over to Cannonball's solo, it's funny that I kind of clocked in my initial dissection on the track that Coltrane's solo was actually Cannonball's. That's what I initially thought. And then I realized, nope, that's incorrect. reverse that. But yeah, Cannonball solo, like, is very much a standard sax solo, but then he kind of puts his own little flair to it. So, like, I do appreciate what he's bringing to the table there. And then the last section, last solo goes to Bill Evans. It's pretty brief, but pretty effective. I do appreciate what's happening there. And yeah, the only other note I got to say about this song here is like the overall composition. Like it's in a 6/8 meter as opposed to like a traditional like 4/4 shuffle. That creates a much more hypnotic and spacious atmosphere for the instrumentalist to create throughout the whole track. However, unlike you, All Blues did not land in my top three. It was very close, man, very close. And when we get into the next track, because spoiler alert, my next track is my third favorite track off the album because well, it's the only track left. I'll explain why.
That's totally fair. Spoiler alert, that track did not land in my top three, obviously, because my top three is completed. But that was the one I would say could have maybe taken over Freddie Freeloader as the other top three track. And I'll get into my feelings on that as well. But I'm glad you mentioned finishing up All Blues. I'm glad you mentioned the structure of it being in 6/8. It may even be 12/8 for all we know. But in either regard, it definitely has that more triplet feel compared to the basic swing of Freddie Freeloader or So What. And I do think that it does create this element of freshness and this element of experimentation that to me is probably central to the album, where you're listening to things you probably would not have listened to before because Davis was just like, hey, let's try this. To me, it works very, very, very well.
So, without any hesitation, without any holding back, or just vamping for the sake of vamping, I'm gonna just kick off the final track off the album, the closing track, and that is Flamenco Sketches. And for me, the way that I'm going to start out my discussion about the track here specifically is talking about like how this song was composed, how the players played it. So this track here is the only track on the album that has no fixed form or set number of bars. Instead of counting measures, each musician was simply given a sequence of 5 modes and was instructed to improvise on each one for as long as they felt was necessary, and then giving a cue to the rest of the band to signal the switch to the next mode. So, yeah, with that in mind, the way that everything is just orchestrated and everything is just like, the end result, it's just very beautiful. It's one of my favorite jazz pieces of all time, honestly. So, going into the nooks and crannies, though, like, coming right out of the gate, that interplay between Paul Chambers and Bill Evans starting everything off, like, you get that simple bass line from Paul Chambers where he just descends down and crashes into Bill just doing chords. Like, it's so good, so tight, just so beautiful. I love it 10 times out of 10. And the first musician up in this exchange of modes is Miles himself. And the way that he's coming off right out of the gate, it's just so perfect. Like, it's a perfect encapsulation of what Miles was trying to do within this whole record here, in that he was trying to get musicians to be more emotive, establish the melody, more expressive. And here, that solo that comes out of the gate with him is just so methodical and it's very purposeful. Like every moment's not wasted, and it's just so good. And then coming up next is John Coltrane, and he just picks up right where Miles left off. Like, in one moment, like, he does a very solid job throughout his solo as well. But one moment that I did highlight as a noteworthy moment was at the ends of certain phrases that Coltrane's laying down. Evans kind of like creeps in there and adds just enough in the pocket to keep the song flowing properly. So good, so effective. I absolutely love the connection with the musicians at that point. Cannonball comes in next and does a fantastic job with his solo, just keeping the flow up. And then Bill takes the next solo, and just the gentle chords that he's starting everything off with. Like, it's so relaxing, and it's basically like a warm bowl of soup on a cold winter's night. Well, it's funny that we talk about that. It's very cold outside, and a bowl of soup does sound pretty good right now. But it's just so relaxing. I love what he's orchestrating there. Then at the very end, it's just Miles comes in with his last little bit there, and it's essentially just effectively bringing everything back home and wrapping up the spirit of the song. And it's just the whole song as a complete package. It's just so beautiful considering like the context of the song, where there's no fixed meter. You could take as long as you want to, and it's just human expression through instruments, and it's executed so well. Everything's so lush and so peaceful. So yeah, I mean, like I alluded to at the end of the discussion of the last track here, this is my third favorite track off the record. And Catch Me on a Different Day, it could honestly be my second favorite track, but I think I just liked the overall like sonic package that Blue and Green did present to the listener, as opposed to Flamenco Sketches here, though. But both tracks are phenomenal in my opinion.
And for me, Flamenco Sketches, again, it Catch Me on Another Day, this could possibly enter my top three, either at 3 or possibly even 2. But to echo some of the things you said, first of all, that intro is just purty. It's a purty intro. Evans and Chambers are, again, just working so perfectly in tandem with each other. And you talk about Miles and his playing. I've mentioned throughout this whole review that I thought his playing on a lot of songs was lyrical. I think this is his most lyrical. And this is him trying, and it almost feels like he has to be, because he structured it that way. He very much didn't want the structure of the song talking for him. He just wanted to say what it is that he wanted to say through the use of his instrument. I think that really came across here. And like you said, the way it was structured, that everyone just pointed each other to, give cues and allowed them to say their piece through their instrument. I noticed that Coltrane on this track was playing with the melody even more, which is kind of weird considering, like you said, there's really not a melody to be had, but he's, I guess, coming up with his own, which is never a bad idea, I suppose. But those little runs that he has in there of several notes within the span of a few seconds, it reminds you that it is, in fact, John Coltrane playing that solo. And then you get Cannonball Adderley, which I agree, his solo is just very, very nice. But the one that stood out to me the most easily was Bill Evans. And the reason it did was listening to it. Again, I'm not a piano player, but I have the vaguest idea of how a piano is played, where, you have both hands, one with the lower register and one with the higher register. And here he is soloing over his own chord comping. Like, he is playing the chords that he's supposed to solo over while soloing. And that is not an easy thing to do. I mean, I know, again, if you're a highly experienced piano player, you very well could look at that and say, okay, well, I do that all the time. Well, all right. Still, the fact that you're trying to maneuver with one hand so that your other hand could do its own thing freely, just from a human perspective, that is very complicated, and the fact that he pulls it off with such elegance is quite amazing. So again, it may not be as complicated as I'm making it out to be, but just felt like, oh my goodness, he's trying to do two things with one set of hands. How is he doing that? So I thought that was very, very impressive. And I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that this is as free form as it gets, because I noticed that. Hey, the chords that we're ending this song on are not the chords we started with. And that's because that was designed that way. It was designed for, free expression and as bare bones a structure as you can possibly get. Just some modes, play over them, and hopefully it all works out. And I'm assuming it probably took a few tries because I do own the CD version of this, and the final track of 6 is an alternate version of this, so I'm assuming it took maybe a few tries for them to get a real good take. But again, that is the beauty of music structured like this, is that you can play it 1,000 times and get a different result every single time, and I think that in itself is very essential to the spirit of what this album was trying to create.
And in that spirit, Matthew, very much like the fine gentleman that created this composition that we just got done talking about, we are, we're very much freeform. We try to get everything in one take. So, yeah, I think we pretty much nailed this review. We saw 5 tracks up, and we smacked those 5 tracks right down. Maybe not smack, but we conquered those 5 tracks through a very thorough discussion. Scorecards have been filled out, so there's only one thing left to say about this review.
We did it, man.
We did it indeed, man. We went outside on this cold December night, and we looked at some Christmas lights, and we were like, hey, those are kind of blue.
I'll allow it. That's not where thought that was going at all, but all right, sure. Well, like you said, one take. Let's put it in.
It's funny that I just looked outside of my Christmas lights. I'm looking at some blue lights. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go with it, man. That's just what I was feeling at the time. So, in terms of overall thoughts and ratings, I'm gonna go first here. So, yes, like I described at the intro about this album here specifically that we just got done talking about, Kinda Blue is very much a legendary album, and it came at a time where one of the most legendary jazz players, composers, sought to innovate the genre, pivoting away from the straitjacket nature of hard bop and bebop and into more of a modal expressive form. And yeah, I'm not even gonna front, dude. The end result speaks for itself. Each individual track, honestly, I almost wanted to play it off here that there is no top track for me. They're all solid fucking tracks. But each track here, from All Blues to Freddie Freeloader to Blue and Green to So What to Flamenco Sketches, every single track here is just solid within its own right. There's so much for even just a casual listener to sink their teeth into. It is the perfect jazz album to introduce to somebody who wants to get into jazz. And that's not it. That's not trying to say it's a pretty basic album in its own right. There's a lot of complex stuff here that is being brought to the listener. You get legendary performances from Davis, Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and don't forget Jimmy Cobb. Don't disrespect that man whatsoever. A lot of just beautiful moments throughout. So yeah, in terms of an overall rating, I'm not gonna overthink it. I'm just gonna speak my truth. This is an utter masterpiece of an album. It deserves all the praise, all the reception, all the positive feedback it has ever gotten in its history. I, too, am going to join in the positive reception by giving Kinda Blue by Miles Davis a beefy, a salty, a savory 10 out of 10.
I really can't add a whole lot to what you just said that I don't already agree with myself, because you're right. The performances on this are otherworldly, and what makes them otherworldly is that Miles Davis, in a sense, decided to create a whole new world for jazz. He decided to take away the hard structure of, pre-bop or post-bop or bebop, whatever you want to call it, and go for something a little bit more freeform. And what he came away with, in a sense, is a structure that became its own right the sort of thing that people think of or feel when they hear jazz music, particularly on So What and Freddie Freeloader. You don't even have to know a damn thing about musical structure to realize, hey, this is jazz, this sounds like jazz, and this sounds like good jazz. And that's what this whole album is just good jazz. Maybe with the exception of Blue and Green and Flamenco Sketches. And even then, the spontaneity on those tracks, based off of the modal structures that were presented by Miles Davis and or Bill Evans, provides for a new music in and of itself that, if nothing else, propelled both Miles and John Coltrane to become even more experimental in the years to come, with albums like A Love Supreme, Bitches Brew, Jack Johnson, which we talked about before, so on, etc. So yeah, this album is a landmark for not just jazz in of itself, but also just music in and of itself and expression in of itself. I personally had a thought today. I wondered, if everything was okay on your end, because the fact that you have stumbled across 3 straight no-doubters in your last choices almost makes me wonder if we're just at the end of the fireworks show with the big finale. But that's another discussion for another time. In this discussion, I'm right there with you. This album is a no-doubter 10 out of 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, did you hear that? That's the sound of Kinda Blue by Miles Davis officially being inducted into the Hey Listen to This Hall of Fame. And full disclosure, everything's okay, man. I'm not filling the end here. I just these are albums that I just wanted to talk about that basically fell within my whole challenge itself, and that challenge is wrapping up here relatively shortly. But that's a discussion for another time, more so next week at the end of that review. So yeah, in terms of next album recommendations, though, several avenues I could take us down in terms of a next album recommendation. I could do Milestones by Miles Davis, because that was a precursor to the album that we just got done discussing. I can do Love Supreme by John Coltrane, because that is very much experimental in its own right, and it's featuring one of the members off of the sextet that we just got done talking about here today. But there was one album that kind of just stuck with me in terms of exploring that spacey kind of jazz element, more melodic and some freeform in its own compositions, and it is coming from Miles Davis himself. So you know what? I'm gonna go with that album, and that album is In a Silent Way. It was released 10 years after Kinda Blue. Good album. I re-listened to it today. Solid listen through. If anybody hasn't listened to that album recently or at all, I highly recommend it. So my official recommendation, if you enjoyed Kinda Blue and you're looking where to go to next, In a Silent Way is a great way to go.
I myself find several avenues I can go down with my next album recommendation. I was also thinking about A Love Supreme. I was also considering possibly either his next or a couple after this from Miles Davis, which is Sketches of Spain, which I feel like dives a little bit more into the orchestral, open space type of composition that Flamenco Sketches and Blue and Green showcased off of Kinda Blue. But I'm going to keep my pick very basic because, one, it's just the album I consider whenever we're talking about good jazz. So if you like good jazz, you like what you heard on this album, you'll like what you hear on the album I recommend. And also, I suspect it was the album we could have reviewed this week if I'd gone the other way. I could be wrong about that, but I'll let you clarify that if you so desire. My choice for album recommendation based off Kinda Blue is from one of the sidemen on this album, which is John Coltrane, and that is his 1960 release entitled Giant Steps. Phenomenal jazz album that, much like Kinda Blue, challenges its surroundings from the weird chord structure on the opening track to going into soulful pieces like Naima, which very much echo the same sort of midnight jazz that Freddie Freeloader does, to just wild showcases of technicality like Countdown. Very, very, very strong album, and I would highly recommend it. And I'm going to recommend it based off of Kinda Blue. So that is my recommendation. Giant Steps from John Coltrane.
Excellent album. Excellent album. Was not the other album that was up for contention, though. The for completion and sake, are you going to take another stab?
I think I know what it might be then. Was it Ornette Coleman?
Yeah, Ornette Coleman's The Shape of Jazz to Come. So, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, to summarize, we inducted Kinda Blue by Miles Davis into the Hey Listen to This Hall of Fame because both me and Matt agree that it is a perfect album, 10 out of 10. Don't think about it, just listen to it. It's a phenomenal experience. I recommended In a Silent Way by Miles Davis, and Matthew recommended Giant Steps by John Coltrane. So, yeah, honestly, all three of those albums are excellent ways to dive into jazz. So, if A, you haven't listened to any of those albums in a while, or B, you're using this episode as a springboard into your venture into jazz, which, side note, thank you. Like, that means a lot. But second of all, yeah, pick any one of those albums and you will be in for an absolute delight. So, speaking about picking albums and expressing our feelings about said albums, we have to venture on into our next review. But there's one thing that is unclear about it, and that being, where are we going to go next, man? I picked Miles Davis, Kinda Blue. Well, I picked the direction that we were going to go into. You picked the specific album. It is now your turn, Matthew. Where are we going next? What is the next path that we might go down? What do you have cooked up?
So the only context I'm going to give you heading into this selection is that I have 3 albums for choice. And it's going to be a little bit of a choose your own adventure, possibly, depending on what you pick. There might be 2 options, there might only be 1. But I will start by giving you 2 years. And those years are 2025 or 0.
Okay. I mean, I gotta pick the year 0, man, because 2025. While I would be interested to see what you might have cooked up behind that door. What the fuck is year 0?
Well, it's not going to be as chaotic as you think it's going to be. So I do apologize for that disappointment. But for the year 0, do you know what happened in the year 0?
No.
Well, I do, or at least, there's a belief behind what happened in the year 0, because in the measurements of time that a lot of people use, we have BC and AD. So if everything before 0 is BC, what is C? And why is C different from BC? Basically, in the year 0, as the story goes, a baby was born in Bethlehem, and we are going to be talking for the first time in the history of our show, despite this being our 3rd holiday season together, a Christmas album. And the Christmas album that I am putting out there is, to me, one of the, well, it is one of the more landmark Christmas albums of all time. I'm not going to spoil too much. And that is an album from 1963 entitled A Christmas Gift to You from Phil Spector. So not only are we doing a Christmas album for the first time, we are also doing an album with multiple artists with multiple songs for the first time. So even though this is all stuff, this isn't a greatest hits package, but it is multiple artists on one album. So that'll be a first for this show as well.
Oh man, that's very interesting, man, and not what I was picturing with year 0, because there is a 9 Inch Nails album with that name, but anyways, I digress. I'm very much excited to dive into a Christmas album, and it's about time, man. Because we've had multiple holiday seasons, but we've not dove into a Christmas album proper. So yeah, dear listener out there, if you've never dove into A Christmas Gift to You by Phil Spector, released in 1963, well, do yourself a favor. Check out that album before next week's review. That way you can have opinions about that album, and therefore you can have opinions about the opinions that me and Matthew are going to be bringing to the table for you the next week on that review. But yeah, sometimes I come up with clever outros for our episodes here, and I kind of drag out by doing some sort of creative vamp. But for the sake of not being a Freddie Freeloader, I'm just gonna end the episode here right now.
And I thank you for doing that, because it proves that someone in the city of Pittsburgh can do things at the very end and not ruin them whatsoever.